board that our growth has slowed down in the last 5 or 6 quarters, in the last 5 or 6 quarters. But I don't think there is a need to worry because this is a transitory phase. This is a phase when the Indian economy is transiting from uh, if you like, uh, from one stage, as it were, to another, because there is, since 2014 onwards, what has happened in the Indian economy is that there is a great effort at formalization of the economy, at making the economy also much more cleaner, transparent, following the rules of the game, etc., and also bringing on board, the financial sector, where, all the structural reforms that have happened, which is like the GST or the IBC or the RERA, or the attempts to, kind of minimize the role of the parallel economy and so on, have changed the rules of the game, and that's changing the rules of the game has meant that, there has to be, the investors are taking their time to understand this and coming back. So I think this is a little bit of like a pause button, but that button is soon going to be lifted because of all the measures that the government has already announced since the last budget, last 2 or 3 months. And also the fact that the government, as the FMS, Finance Minister, said very often, is fully cognizant of it. The Reserve Bank and the North Block are both on the same page. You've never had a situation where the Reserve Bank has reduced its repo rates, right, 5 times in a row, consequently. So yes, we are in a phase slowdown, in a sort of period where economy is slowed down, but I think this is simply a phase where we will begin to take off again in the second half of fiscal year 1920.
Right. I was interviewing Mr. Nitin Gadkari a couple of weeks back, and he very categorically mentioned that the intent of government is to actually speed up the growth process or ramp up the economy. But somewhere it is getting stuck because the banks are a little worried and they are taking very cautious approach in lending. Yesterday we read Nirmala Sitharaman's statement also that the reckless lending which happened before 2014 has caused the current slowdown. Now, if we look at the situation right now, and if you were to take a bird's eye view of economy, can you comfortably say that the worst is behind us at this point?
I'm confident that the worst is behind us. I think the second quarter of 1920, which is the July-September quarter, probably is the bottoming out of the cycle, and we will see better growth. I mean, for example, investment sentiment behaves with a lag. The fact of reduction in corporate tax rates that has been done, by the finance minister will of course take time to take root, and for the corporates to react to that. The fact that the interest rates have come down, the repo rate has come down, will take time to be transmitted to the rest of the economy. But the most important thing here is that we must remember that what happened, and as the finance minister explained, is the banks, when this government came into office in 2014, the banks had been so strapped with the non-performing assets, and their situation was so terrible actually that they were in pretty much no position to lend further money for which is the one which finances the growth. And you've seen that if you look at the data, that's consistently since about 2011, the growth of credit from commercial banks to the rest of the industry came down consistently over time, and that was in some sense covered up by the lending done by the NBFCs, the non-banking financial companies, and that again took a knock after ILFS happened in September. Now, all of that has meant that the credit availability in the economy, plus also the cost of capital, have both not been supportive of the growth rate, and the fact that today in India our credit to GDP ratio is about 54%, while, for example, it is nearer 200% in China, also means that the real sort of the juice, the credit, the thing, the sort of what propels growth has been some sort missing. Now the government has taken several steps in that direction. the government has taken a number of steps to make sure that the banks lead, support the NBFCs, etc. And so I'm surely hoping that beginning of the second half of this year, you will see a growth resurgence and growth coming back, and then in the subsequent year, growth going back to the levels that we wanted to go back to.
Right. Anand, you operate in an industry which can directly gauge the impact of, the economic sentiment through corporates, through advertising, through all the conversations that we pick up from everybody who's part of this ecosystem. Riding on the back of a bumper monsoon, do you expect, I mean, what are you picking up right now? Do you expect, especially the states in the north, because their economy and their destiny is directly linked to the kind of monsoon that we experience as an economy. Do you expect these states, especially the states which are, if I may use the term, catch-up states, who are currently lagging behind the national averages, do you expect them to outperform? Is that the visibility that you have right now?
I think outperform the last 2 quarters, yeah, yes. Outperform last year, no. But also last year was in fact a bit of a bumper year after the slowdown of FY17 post demonetization and GST. So 18 was a pretty good year. I'm talking about from our industry's point of view. So to catch up with last year seems pretty difficult considering the ramp has been so low in the last 2 quarters. But the next 2 quarters, the sense is that it is going to be better than the last 2 quarters. So Q3 and Q4 are going to be better than Q1 and Q2. But Q3, Q4, FY20 is going to be worse than FY19.
Right. So what was the whole thought process behind, because India Economic Conclave always addresses the national issues, and last year, like you rightly mentioned, we championed the cause of fast track to 5 trillion. When we started the regional chapters initiative this year, the whole thought process was to deep dive into the economy of states, because at the end of the day, the national economy is sum of parts story. So what really went behind, taking this step at this point when economy is already going through a churn?
I think, we underestimate the size and the potential of our regions when we actually look at India as one, one national number, and then put it on a list of nations of the world. And then, one is at a general level, we say that we are in the top 5 or top 7 or whatever, and feel happy about it. But do not really realize that each of our states and our regions are practically as large as, in fact, some major economies of the world. Yeah. I mean, that day I was looking at, I was talking at a very community function, Kerala, on Onam. I'm from that state. So in Bombay I was talking, and when I was looking at the economic ranking, I was quite surprised to note that Kerala is bigger than Sri Lanka, and Kerala is bigger than, or almost the size of Hungary as an economy. I mean, have we actually looked at each of our states as a potential, countries in economic terms? And if we do that, can we sort of have better strategy? And I think I'm looking at it from that point of view, because I mean, when we do the network, Times network is a large, single monolithic entity when you look at it just as Times network. But then, of course, there are different strategies and different growth stages that each of our brands are in. And from that point of view, I think there is merit in, deep diving and looking into details of what goes into, certain states in the north, for instance. I mean, this whole thing about catch-up states, I think probably there might be a, case to sort of, have special policies or, categories of policies which are required to, fast track them at least to average. Because, you grow only when everybody comes to average, and the above average obviously sort of defends and then goes up. So I think that's where we looked at it. Because a single national event usually talks about, I would say not 30,000 feet, but 10,000 feet vision of the overall economy. But when we go into regional chapters, there is a very strong potential for real ideas to come out of discussions like these. And that probably sort of, would be our contribution. I'm sure there are a lot of states which are doing this by themselves, by doing conclaves, etc. But what we bring to the table as Times Network is something that many others cannot, because arguably we now are, addressing almost 50 to 55% of the total English viewership in this country, whether it is news or entertainment. And from that point of view, we believe that people like us, all people like us,
Right.
at some stage or the other, at least once a week or once a month, would be watching our channels. And if Times Network picks up an agenda and tries to put it up there, I think we will do a lot more to the states and regions than what we do naturally, which is to do for the country. Because English
Right.
media obviously sort of, looks at national events and national activities, and that is expected. And that is anyways being done. So I think putting focus on the states and regions in this micro manner, probably even more micro that we should go into, is probably going to be great from the nation's point of view and the development agenda point of view.
Right. So Rajiv sir, taking cue from that, and I'm sure you are obviously focusing on that, the states which are currently probably slightly slower compared to national averages, how we can bring them up to the speed. But is there a need for a separate set of policy for these catch-up states, not only in North, but nationwide, by which we can give a more focused treatment to these states for them to catch up?
So, the question is, when we say that we will bring them up, who is that we? The fact is that all our states are, in some sense, pretty much sovereign. And they are fiscally sovereign, they are sort of sovereign in many other ways, and industrial policies, the health, education, governance, the critical pillars of getting economic growth, are these 3 or 4 that I just mentioned. Now, all the states are completely, in some sense, in their own right to follow policies that they want to in this case. So I think it's let me compliment the Times Network to say that this is a wonderful idea, to not think of India as one monolith economy and carrying it forward, because really all the action about growth and employment and jobs and human development indices, etc., happen at the level of the states. I keep telling everybody that the rubber meets the road only at the level of the state. So if you have got, if you can rank whatever you may rank in the ease of doing business nationally, but if you're not improving the ease of doing business at the state level, then you're not getting anywhere. So that's the first thing. So each state, I think, as Anand mentioned many times now, so, is a economy by in its own right, much bigger than an economy. My state, UP, 200 million people plus, will rank somewhere the 7th or the 8th, 6th or 7th of the largest economies in science. Now, that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that I think that even within states like UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, there are regions which have their own characteristics. Now, Bundelkhand has pretty much nothing in common with the east of UP. Because one is so dry and arid, etc., and the other is sort of constantly plagued by floods and waterlogging and so on. So, therefore, what you would need to do is to develop blueprints within these states for different regions, because not only do they have different, geo-economic characteristics, but their human resource endowments, their mineral endowments, their targets, as it were, would be very different, because that is what you need for each of the states. Now, we in NITI Aayog have taken it down even further, as you know, that we have selected 112 aspirational districts, which are the most backward districts in the country, and to say that, look, we want these districts to come up to the national average, because if we lift those, then, then the national average will go up on its own right. But that's one part of it. The second part, however, is that you could have an argument for a minute that if you actually let those who are already moving fast, if you encourage them more, they could become the drivers of the whole economy. Now, so if there are some states, and this is happening, willy-nilly if you like. So, because let's give you an example. That there are all these coastal states of the south, and there's one, by the way, there's one of the things which distinguishes them from the north, because they are landlocked. And the coastal states in the south are all, therefore, much more, sort of oriented towards the global economy, towards the world trade. Now, if you put some coastal economic zones in those areas, which then get linked to global production chains in the region and globally, and therefore are inviting intra-industry investment in those coastal zones, then they can grow at even a much faster rate and pull the whole economy upwards, and then you can use your distributive mechanisms of the Finance Commission and otherwise to bring the other states to sort of transfer some of these resources and surpluses into the other states for them and to improve their lot. Now, so therefore, an argument which relies solely on the fact that you have to bring up those at the bottom of the pyramid to the, to the middle level may face a difficulty because the capacity of these states to improve their own growth and employment generation may need to be built up before they can achieve this. And I think that capacity then needs to be built up through the central government and through the NITI Aayog, where you say that, look, let's improve their capability for generating growth by, let's say, focusing on things like health, education, nourishment, and governance. Now, I think those are the 4 key areas where if you would actually focus on in these states that we're talking about, I think you'll do a lot of good. So there are 2 different approaches. China, and I'll end here, China followed the second one. They said their coastal provinces will pull the country together. In fact, then there was a famous phrase which I have now forgotten by Deng Xiaoping, which said that, yeah, in fact, the head of the fish determines how the speed of the fish would move. And the head were these coastal states. Now, so that's what they did. We may not be able to do it so successfully because of our own democracy, because of the fact that we are a federal structure, we need to keep everybody together, etc. But nonetheless, you have to take on board both those possibilities to be able to devise a state-specific policy for generating jobs and promoting growth.
Right. Amit, you keep compiling data and you have been working very closely with Government of India. What is your key takeaway when we talk of northern states or north of India? Which are the states where they might be lagging behind at this point, but where you see maximum potential to probably catch up and even outperform the national averages?
So this is an interesting question in terms of which are going to be the states which are going to outperform. From my point of view, there are going to be about 4 states in north of India which are really going to define a lot of growth in the coming years. Madhya Pradesh, for an example, if you really look at Haryana, Punjab, and UP, these would be the states which would actually do a lot of growth or assume a lot of growth. In fact, if you really look at the numbers itself, even today, if you really look at it, Haryana is close to about 8% of India's GDP. And if you really look at UP, it is at a lower end at about 7%. But the question is, the potential that actually exists is far more phenomenal for UP than any other place. With the kind of demography that UP has, about 200 million people out there, if you're able to train well, then this is going to be the region which is actually going to grow the fastest. But having said that, I think if you really look at the whole Indo-Gigantic plain, this is the side which has the highest potential in the country. It is actually a little bit of a laggard in terms of what you say as to the north and the southern states. The potential certainly exists. The second thing that we have to really look at is in terms of understanding what is going to happen within the cities of these states. Because cities are going to become the drivers of economic activity, whether we like it or not. Whichever place in the world is, there are the cities which drive economic growth. So we will have to identify those city regions or agglomerations which are really going to define the growth in the coming years. In fact, we will have to break down that shackle of the state as well. In fact, if you look at the region of, say, Gurgaon, Delhi, and Noida together, the potential is far higher to understand what is the economic complexity, how economic activity happens, how interactions can actually happen, and that can propel the growth per se. In fact, Kanpur, Pankhi as an area or Lucknow as an area can actually be looked at as one single agglomeration and seen how that can be grown. In fact, what Rajiv ji was saying, we have to look at the level of what you call as what is the economic activity within districts. In fact, the 112 districts that he's talking about, if we really look at the economic activity across all districts within these states, we will be able to identify what needs to be done. The next thing that I feel which we need to look at is clearly identifying what each state is good at. In fact, each state has a great potential in actually 3 or 4 areas. We have simply not identified that. I think what happens is all states want to do everything under the sun. It is not that every state will be able to do everything under the sun. We will have to identify the sectors where we can actually grow. Say Haryana has an amazing potential for food processing. UP will have amazing potential for MSMEs and some ancillary units that can actually get created. So can we identify the sectors where we should actually push and really take it forward? There is a certain level of identification, but I think we have to really push it forward in terms of saying the exact identification of sectors. The cluster-based approach of identification would be an important one as we really move forward.
Yeah, please.
essentially what Amit has said just now is a version of having a working industrial policy for our regions and states and so on. Identify whose competitive advantage, identify what state does well, get clusters, etc., and so on, right? And therefore, this is the essence of a industrial policy. I kind of tend to think differently, which is that in terms of public policy, what you want really is to improve those 4 pillars, as I said. And the 4 pillars are, you see, there are states now in India where malnourishment is more than 50%. So 50% of our children born are stunted or wasted, are undernourished in any case. There are states in India where the majority of districts, the women are, more than 60% of the women are anemic, right? So malnourishment, which comes as a part of health, then education, primary, secondary, and higher, but most essentially pre-primary and primary, because that's where the formative stages are. Third, as I said, governance. And governance, by governance, simply one means, that the state, that what is called the development state, rather than another, where the government is in the business of promoting and facilitating private investment. So malnourishment, health, education, and governance. Those are the 4 areas which, if we focus only on, and then governance includes, by the way, law and order. Because there's a huge thing, because the point is that if you, anyway, I don't want to elaborate, I think it's self-evident. If there are these 4 things which you focus on in these northern states, and where you will see that these variables are deficient compared to the southern states. If you do these 4, the rest, the market and the private investment will take care of. You don't need to select anything. If Moradabad produces good brassware, that's what the investment will do. So you don't need, they'll self-select themselves. So I think it is important at this stage, in my view, to focus on the key responsibilities and deliverables of the government. And if you do that, then the rest will take care of them, because these are the 4 pillars that I want to read. And then finally, there's one more which is now currently very important, and which is innovation. Because today is the world of technology, technological change, etc. So this is what again the NITI Aayog has been doing in setting up 5,000 Atal Tinkering Labs and incubation centers, etc. So if you do those 5 things, I think these states will surely catch up, because as he himself said, that's where the greatest potential is for growth. So you have to take care of the demography, of the human resources, which is, and both health, education, and malnourishment, and in some sense, good governance, really focuses on the improvement of the human resource and the environment in which it can prosper. I think that's my view, at least, and rather than go into specific industrial policies.
Right. Before I move on to Anand, I have one question for you only. Recently, if you look at some of the big voices and globally recognized voices, they have been sounding little, I would say, jittery about India's economic prospects. And there are noises. We have heard Mr. Raghuram Rajan stated very clearly that India has lost its economic way. And then we heard Mr. Abhijit Banerjee. He also mentioned that, there are major challenges in front of Indian economy at this point. Are we as a nation, as economy, and as government conscious enough and admitting the fact that yes, there are challenges at national level, there are challenges at state level, and then, try and rectify?
Yeah. All these, all these big names and, sort of noises that you're talking about, I think, again, take us away, distract us from what really should be the focus of our conversation, which is what you're trying to do. Which is that you've got to come down to the 1,500, 200 feet level. Because you see, talking, of course we are conscious of the fact that the Indian economy is in a slowdown phase. Of course we are conscious of the fact that there are huge challenges that we have inherited. And whether it's water conservation, or it is swachhata, or it is open defecation, or it's health or malnourishment, this government has not only been conscious but has been brave enough to put them out in the public domain and and talk loudly about it. The fact that the Prime Minister talks about in his 15th August speech about the respect that private investment needs to be given, investors need to be given, has never been done before. So we know that there is a problem about the treatment that the private investor gets at the hands of the, of the Babudam and the license Raj and the Inspector Raj. So we are absolutely conscious. But then how to go about it? You cannot decide on a pan-India strategy. And that is, I think, where you have done the right thing in coming to, and trying to sort of talk about us, regions. In fact, I would urge you much more, very strongly, to take it to the state level. Because each state is an economy in its own right in a very major way. I mean, there is, as I said, there cannot be anything in common between Goa and Manipur. There can be hardly anything in common between Arunachal and Maharashtra. But each one of them has the potential to become a middle income country, and have a per capita income of $5,000. And the average at the moment is about $2,000 odd, right? But we have to aim at each state achieving a per capita income of $5,000 in the next, 10 years or so. And for that, you will need state-specific policies. And that's what we in NITI Aayog are trying to do by, for the first time, creating these rankings which will spur and encourage states to compete with each other and take up policies which are specific to that state. And of course, replicate some of those which are best practices in other states. But I'm convinced that you need in this country state-specific economic agenda, but of which the 4 or 5 that I mentioned to you earlier were the common features, where the public sector, where the government policy has to focus upon, and the private sector then will take care of itself.
Right. Anand, your take on that? Are we looking at state IECs now, like you mentioned?
Yeah, I think it does sound like something that we should explore next year, maybe at least a few states. There is a good potential for, going that way. I think, when I was thinking about states, we are also talking about interstate travel by people. I don't think many people know about many states. So, I mean, there are a lot of opportunities within India that can sort of, hold each other's hands and go up. So, it's not just about, some big brother attention into a state to sort of do things, but, making each state aware of the other state and what can be done there, starting with just going and visiting there, probably something that we should, start sparking.
Right. I have a macro question in mind, because end of the day, everybody is talking about 5 trillion. Do you think this $5 trillion by 2025 is now, looking at the current scenario and the kind of, curve we are looking at in terms of recovery of economy, it's doable? Is it realistic?
Before 2019-2020 unfolded the way it's unfolding, this clear sort of estimate was that you needed something like a 12% nominal rate of growth to reach to a $5 trillion economy. Now that will go up because of what we've had in the first half of this year to, let's say, not 12 but 13%. Now 13% nominal growth can be broken down into 8% real growth and 5% inflation. Now the easiest way for any government to achieve this would be to ramp up inflation, and to therefore just go, completely sort of berserk with your, public expenditures, throw caution to the wind and say that, if inflation rises to, as it had done during the UPA regime, to 7, 8, 9%, then you can achieve this 13% growth, even with a 5% real rate of growth. Now that will be fooling the people. You will get there, and therefore what you have to take into cognizance is that you have to at the same time take a reasonable rate of exchange, because the trillion is a dollar figure. So, because if you follow this route that I'm mentioning about the inflation, etc., your exchange rate will sort of completely plummet down to about 80, 85, who knows where. So therefore, what you need to do is to make sure that you achieve about 8.5%, 9% real rate of growth. That's what you have to do. Now, can that be achieved? I'm convinced that it can be achieved.
It looks like a tall order at this point.
I know, but you see, the second half, if we go back to, 7%, which will give you a 6%, overall. If you get 7 and 7.5% in the second half, then I think the platform, with all that work that has been done, will be ready to take this economy in the next few years to 8.5%, 9%. In 2005, the CII, and I was the chief economist at that time, they were talking at that time in the industry that this country should achieve double-digit growth rates. I see no reason for it to not achieve the double-digit growth rate if we, as I said, if we in public policy focus on those 5 pillars, on a more efficient, transparent, effective delivery of public services, and promoting the private investment and facilitating. I can't see why we can't do, this 8.5%, 9% rate of growth which is required. Just think, let me give you one other example. Earlier, I used to divide India like that. Yeah? And if you draw a line here which passes through Kanpur, the west was the driver of growth. And the west driver of growth happened because there are these nodes of growth, which is the NCR region, and then there is the sort of, the Rajkot, Saurashtra, that sort of region, and then you got the Bombay, Pune, and then you got Bangalore and Hosur. So it's like a crescent of growth. What you want to do is you create a similar crescent on the east side and create those nodes of growth. And I think if you do that, and you can identify those as to where those are, and these would probably be those which are now going to be much more based on agro-processing and labor-intensive things, and using the new technology. So what I think must be focused upon, for example, is improving the infrastructure on this side. So that, the dedicated freight corridor between Delhi and Kolkata, or the inland water roadways, or holding up the sort of, all of those things if you require. So I think if we bring those growth nodes with city clusters, as Amit was saying, etc., 8.5%, 9% rate of growth not only is achievable, but of course is necessary. I think it's not at all difficult to achieve that rate of growth. Yes, this year has been, the first half has been not so good, but given all the structural reform that we have done in this country in the last 5 years, I think, and the focus that one is giving today on private investment, facilitating it, getting the public sector out of the way through divestment and exports, that the Prime Minister has talked about, I think this rate of growth should be possible.
There's also a view that we did so many structural reforms that the whole structure has become a little slow,
No, the rules of the game have changed. See, earlier what has happened is that the private sector only had the upside risk when they borrowed from the banking sector, right? And all the downside risk was the public sector, the taxpayers. As a result of which you had this 10.5 lakh crore of NPAs, and you got, the rules of the game have changed. That for the first time, the private sector has to bear both the upside and the downside risks. And the rules of the game have also changed that now you cannot create capacities and then produce 3 times the amount and sell the, the rest in the sort of parallel economy. So those rules of the game have changed because without formalizing this economy, with, until so far you had only 8 or 9% of labor force in the formal sector. You cannot have a growing economy. You cannot have an economy which will make the middle income transition with that sort of a structure. You have to bring more and more, 30, 40% of your labor force in the formal sector of the economy, which is then within a part of your tax network, which is a part of your, global production chains. Now that huge change has been initiated in the last 5 years. And this will therefore, because the rules of the game have changed, everybody is sort of, and therefore what you need here is, and that's a key thing, is policy predictability and a policy stability. And I think that's what the government is, absolutely, committed to do. And you will see that this is happening. And once you do that, the private investment will take us forward to an 8.5%, 9% rate of growth.
Right. I'll take closing comments. Anand, you wanted to say something? Final comments?
No, I think I just had one question, sir. That while we say that 13% is a mix, can be a mix of real and inflation, and yes, inflation-led growth over 5 years or 7 years may be fooling and sort of just making window dressing. Is it probably a good idea that at least in this year or next, we go a little lax on the fiscal deficit and, in the short term, take the inflation route, because there is also something called as mood of the people and the entrepreneurs. So when we talk to, and I'm talking to you as a media business person and not as a question from a editorial point of view, that, we meet a lot of, people who are advertisers, who are the people who are running businesses. There is a dip in the mood, probably, some amount of public expenditure, some amount of putting money into people's hands right at the bottom of the pyramid. Wouldn't that sort of improve? For instance, when I look at Diwali right now, it's probably really, really dim. I mean, we can't see any major, noise in Bombay, and definitely not in Delhi. Won't, a little bit of that, at least for this year, make a difference, sir?
Look, I have been on record and said many times that I'm not a fiscal hawk. And I always therefore said that fiscal policy is got to be a counter-cyclical policy. And I have therefore always emphasized that the government job is to bring the revenue deficit down to zero if you can, because that's where you are spending more than what you are earning. And that's not the right way to do, because, in the current side. And therefore, your fiscal stance could be expansionary. And when fiscal and monetary policies work in tandem, they achieve a bigger result. Now, I think what has happened in terms of the cut in the corporate tax rates, 1.94 lakh crore hit is what is estimated, for that. So the government, you can see that the government's intention is not to, hold on to this fiscal target as tightly as ever. But there also what we are trying to do, which will help, is to really ramp up our disinvestment. So non-tax revenues can increase. Now, the last thing in this is that, having said this, the quality of the fiscal deficit is hugely material. So and as you said, if we spend extra borrowings on creating productive capacity by ramping up public capital expenditure, that will bring, and here I think what you can do, and I'm being very specific, that public capital expenditure, if it went into really, reviving the real estate sector again, will have a huge growth impact and a feel-good factor, because real estate now is pretty much down, has a huge backward linkage across 200 industries. So that's the sort of thing that we can do, and I think the government, is doing that, because there's now several steps, for the housing finance companies to be supported, etc.
Right. All right. So we have our next session ready. Amit, quickly, you want to add something very quickly?
Yes, just a very quick thing. In fact, I think there is no doomsayers worry in India right now. I think there is a huge potential that actually exists. The structural reforms that we have seen are actually going to give you results over a longer period of time, and they're going to be phenomenal. In fact, the tax rate cut that the government has done recently is one of the biggest reforms from my point of view after 1991,
right,
because that is going to throw a lot of impetus into the industry. It's just a question of time when it is really going to take the wings, and that's how it is.
All right. So the bottom line is pain is short term, but the gain is going to be for long term. Thank you so much, gentlemen, all of you, for joining us, and I think this will set the stage for the India Economic Conclave North chapter. Thank you so much. Thank you.